Hey everybody, my name's Sean. I'm an American teacher in China, ESL teacher. I lived in China for near 10 years now. Lived all over China too, in different cities. So I kind of consider it a second home to a great degree. Currently I'm in Fujian province in a small city called Jinjiang. I'm teaching primary and middle school kids. Just got out of bed too, so I'm woke, but doesn't mean I'm going to get through the day. So you okay, Junior? Just because you're woke doesn't mean you're going to get through the day. Okay, Junior? That's my take on that. But anyway, I just want to do hopefully a quick sort of report here, just kind of things I'm seeing. The mountain here, there's a mountain that I usually hike. That has opened up recently, so I was out there yesterday. A lot of people there, none of them wearing masks, or very few of them wearing masks. So I don't really think it's a good idea, and I kind of want to tell you it's what I'm seeing here with the St. John's University's tracking map of the virus spread. It's apparently the U.S. has more confirmed cases at this point than China, which makes sense because the U.S. has all the testing kits, and is being very aggressive about, making them available and testing people. So naturally, they're going to have more cases at this stage. And it's kind of important to point out the differences between governances. Between China and the United States, where you have the United States, you have a federal government, and then you have the states government. And apparently, what's going on, it seems, is that the federal government's kind of, invested in the welfare of the entire country. But in terms of dealing with the epidemic outbreaks, you have, they turn a lot of that over to the states without intervening and choosing not to infringe on, states' rights, and that's how the American system works. And I think that's probably the best way to deal with it, because essentially you're going to have a lot of Wuhans. You're going to have a lot of outbreaks in certain cluster areas, because if this virus was just first recognized, first identified in November, it means it was out there spreading, or November or early December. It was out there spreading rapidly and exponentially, rather rapidly prior to that, and by that time, by January, it basically had spread across the world. So, taking that into consideration, that there are a lot of cases out there that just have not been identified, it seems what the United States is in the process of doing, and actually sort of confronting this very specific. Remember, this is something that was out there, kind of hidden in a lot of different different other diseases or different ailments, and was being misdiagnosed at that point because no one had sort of identified this particular strain. So what's happening now is that the United States has the ability to identify that particular strain, and it's kind of aggressively going forth and doing that. So you're going to have a lot of cases. And also, fortunately, at this stage, we have, there's a more developed sense of responding to that on what is effective. And you can, credit that a lot to Wuhan and the response there. Now, and this is the difference of governance, though. China was dealing with the initial outbreak, and China has a central authority. It does not have that separation of states and federal government. It's really basically the federal government is in charge. Now, that being said, certainly there's a lot of, they expect the provinces to take care of their province, but overall the federal government has, overriding authority over any sort of actions being taken in those places. So you can expect where the outbreak occurred that the federal government would be very sort of severe in their response. But unfortunately, what that also means is that a lot of the provinces don't want to disrupt anything. They see the severity of the government upon that one province, and they're like, I'm not saying nothing. They see that severe response, and they say, we're not doing nothing here. That everything's cool here. But I think the reality is that there's probably a lot more infections out there that are not being sort of addressed in China at this point. And there were, and there probably still are. Because of that, you have this great, like they pulled their sort of very severe actions in Wuhan, and then all the media was out there and compiling all the worst aspects of it together and creating these 30-minute rolls where, it just looked like, yeah, we don't want nothing to do with that. And that's what happens a lot in China, and things like Tiananmen Square, any sort of, when they see that, everybody's like, yeah, we don't, we're going to avoid that. Whereas in the United States, you can have states, and the elected officials are really in charge of, the state officials are in charge of looking after the needs, and their careers, their job is contingent on them providing for their needs. So that's why you see people like Andrew Cuomo, saying to the federal government, hey, we need more, because that's our needs. You can expect them to do that. You can expect different states to say we need more, and other states to say we're fine, or we're doing okay. We don't need your needs. The federal government still has to kind of look out for all of them. But people like Andrew Cuomo know that if he doesn't, cater to his state's needs, he's out of office. Somebody else will be put in there who does. And that's kind of, they have a great deal more of autonomy, in laws. In terms of things. That's why the federal law doesn't really sort of always, or doesn't have the capacity to sort of interfere in the needs of the state. So that's what you're seeing in the United States. And it's probably better because you do have the ability to, actually address the spread of the disease to a greater extent, because you're going to more likely get more people. Like, I don't have to please the federal government. A lot of the states, I don't have to please the federal government. I have to keep my people, because if anybody's going to be that severe, really, I have that ability. I don't want to, I have the ability to deal with it and try and take care of the needs, or, I'm out of office. I think you see that more occurring in the United States, or what you're seeing, and, they're able to, and of course, there's the political climate. There's much more sort of an openness towards political ideologies that are not necessarily in agreement. So that's what I think what we're seeing right now, and it's just really important to keep in mind that the two different sort of forms of government and how that sort of operates and how that can affect a situation like this. Like I said, if we're looking at just the sort of the facts of the matter and the rate that this virus spreads exponentially, it's more than likely a lot of people in China are still infected. That being said, you always have that sort of base sense that once the fire's gone through, it's safer to be where the fire has gone, burned through. But this, as a virus, it has a lot of fuel still here. It still has plenty of fuel to burn here. Whereas, if you don't extinguish, whereas it hasn't been sort of isolated and extinguished in other areas, it won't have the ability to return because it's being detected. What else I want to talk about? Another thing I wanted to look at here was wet markets. Like I said, I've been in China a very long time, and I've been in many cities, and a lot of people are pointing this as a lot of the means of the outbreak. There's an article here by the Los Angeles Times, fellow Christopher St. Cavish, where he says they're not to blame, and I have to say, it is sort of skeptical to me, because in all my experiences in China, and I shop at wet markets, I was speaking with a friend of mine on Facebook about my perspective. I have never seen exotic animals in wet markets. I've never seen a pangolin. I've never seen a bat in any of the wet markets I've been in. And I've even lived in Wuhan, and I've never seen them there. I typically buy vegetables and fruits at wet markets. On occasion, I bought meats. Fish I will buy sometimes at wet markets. Once again, they are wet markets because the floor, well, it's not really once again, let me just explain why they're wet markets. Because they hose down the floor a lot. A lot of the blood and the dirt and everything is always constantly falling to the floor, so they kind of just wash it down the drains. And so the floors are, continually wet. But I want to take a look at an article here by by the LA Times, and it kind of goes through it. I'll just go through it with you and kind of point out things that I agree with and things that I don't agree with. So as some media outlets cover coronavirus, journalists are mixing up wet markets and wildlife markets, but most wet markets are not wildlife markets, and confusing the two is dangerous. I agree with that to an extent. I mean, there are live animals. Fowl and fish typically are commonly found live, and you can have them slaughtered at the market by different vendors. The one that I go to currently does not have any sort of live animals there. What typically happens with the bigger meats, and what we're talking about here typically is pork and beef and goat. I have on very rare occasions seen dog and donkey, but typically it's pork, and what would happen is they would slaughter the pig and bring in the carcass and butcher it there, and it would just kind of all the butchered meats would be on display on a table, or you can have them, cut them up, or you can have them ground into hamburger, I've noticed. But there's no covering, they don't come in plastic, it's all exposed, and it's very certainly conducive to germs at that point. So yes, I agree, it's not wildlife markets, though you might argue the variety of fish is somewhat exotic, I would say, always in wet markets. And fish is typically kept live in plastic bins of water with a hose aerating the water. Wet markets are what China calls its fresh food markets, the kind you see all over the developing world and in many parts of Europe, where small stalls sell fresh vegetables and butchers sell meat, primarily pork. Yes, they are a daily market for tens of millions. Chinese prefer to talk to the people who sell them produce, meat, seafood, and tofu, and in small cities are often the only outlets for small-scale farmers who can't meet their supply requirements for supermarkets. Totally agree. I find that they're very intertwined with local economies, especially in not the larger cities. These are typically farmers from just outside the city, bringing their produce in and selling it, and farmers and people who raise livestock just outside the city, bringing it into the city to sell. And that's certainly the situation with what market I go to here currently. Still, it's important to differentiate. Most wet markets, especially in big cities, may look like farmers markets, but they're buying from some wholesale suppliers at supermarkets. Yes, totally agree with that too, because you'll find certain exotic fruits that you can't grow them in a local area, so you'll find those there. And yes, you can, even on the outskirts of the cities, you'll find a lot of these warehouses, these suppliers. They are a cornerstone of China's food distribution system and have benefits for society, both tangible and intangible, from improved nutrition for children to stronger interpersonal relationships. So-called for their open-air origins, where the ground was hosed down throughout the day, they are a traditional backbone to China's food supply system. Totally agree. I guess you'd probably say there is more of a tendency to get fresh vegetables and have that kind of nutrition in a Chinese diet, and a lot of that can be attributed to these kinds of places. In aesthetic sense, they are an antidote to the sterile plastic-wrapped world of the supermarkets that have tried unsuccessfully to replace them. Okay, aesthetic sense, I wouldn't say that really falls in their favor most of the time. They can be rather grim and dark, and at times, they can be rather they can be rather gruesome. There are certainly on the big cities, there's kind of the cleaner ones that actually look a little more sort of attractive. But in general, they can be pretty dark and gruesome. I'm going to say they're typically not that well lit, to be honest with you. and they stink. With all that meat, that rotting meat and the drain and stuff like that, they tend to have a pretty putrid kind of smell to them. I wouldn't say really in aesthetic sense they're an antidote. It's much more sort of accessible to be in a supermarket where everything's kind of wrapped and everything like that, and it's much more welcoming, I guess you'd say, than a lot of these wet markets. In the early 2000s, China implemented a policy called Mong Gai Tao, or replacing wet markets with supermarkets, in a bid to upgrade cities and modernize wet markets. See, I didn't know about this, and it seems like something they have been unable to reorganize. I didn't know they had attempted to do so. It's difficult. I would totally agree with the ability to do so. It's kind of something that needs to be sorted out. Maybe just kind of upgrading aspects of the health. Like maybe they have to cover the meats. They have to refrigerate meats throughout the day. Inspections at wet markets. Maybe something like that could be. And without, because there are aspects to it that I do find, beneficial. After a couple of years and a boom in the number of supermarkets from foreign companies like Carrefour and local ones like Hualian, customers stuck their wet markets for most fresh food and turned to supermarkets for supplemental. Yep, I agree with that totally. Though I do buy my meats at the supermarkets just because I know there's inspections and there's, the meat is typically covered or somehow. Well, actually, it's not. It's still or frozen, or some extent it's a little more. To some extent it's less exposed, or it's a little more sort of regulated. What markets are a reserve of diversity in the age of consolidation, streamlining, and a hedge against the supermarketization of China's food. Far from being replaced by supermarkets, wet markets have made improvements in sanitation and hygiene and are still thriving. In Shanghai alone, there were nearly 1,000 as of 2019. After a several-month renovation, my daily wet market in Shanghai's former French concession reopened last month with terrazzo floors and window doors. It is not the norm, it is a model. Yeah, I have to agree there. They can be small, they can be large, and the larger ones, you might have a whole floor of vegetables, whole floor of meats, whole floor of fish. Smaller ones, the problem I think is, you have all the traffic from the meats and all that blood and stuff kind of being tracked over into the fish and tracked over into the vegetables. And that's going to be a problem with the small ones. We don't have the space. They've improved in sanitation and hygiene. I don't see that happening very much, because my idea would be like they would start to do more inspections. They would start to have people there. It's not like China doesn't have the manpower, to have to, actually have a, vegetable and health inspector at each of these markets to kind of sort of regulate and look at and to go, do inspections of food when it comes into the market. And I still don't see any sort of form of sort of, refrigeration or anything like that on meats and things like that. I've never seen it. Sometimes, like a fish, you'll see it on ice or something like that. And there are a few sort of around wet markets. Usually there are like stores, more sort of like, there's a big open space where everybody just kind of has their stalls, like a farmer's market. But around that you have like stores, little kind of, stores. Some of them have like frozen meats and stuff like that. But usually they're like spices and sauces and things like that around them. Sometimes clothes. They foster long-term relationships between. Social level wet markets are important as a way to pass down cultural food knowledge. Stallholders often make recommendations for which vegetables traditionally go together and how to cook them. They discuss which vegetables are in season, coming into season, or going out of season. They foster long-term relationships between customers and stallholders, creating personal. Yes, I would say that's all true. I myself will find one person that gives me a fair price. I don't, if I get a sense that they're not going to try and sort of rip me off, I'll just kind of go to them. And I think that's I can't really say that every person is like that, but I would say, most people find one wet market that they always go to, and they find certain vendors that they continually go back to, and it's part of this relationship building. And their business model often means lower prices. Although both supermarkets and wet markets in China often buy from the same wholesale suppliers, supermarkets generally bring in their vegetables the evening before they go on sale to clean, weigh, and package. On the other hand, wet markets vendors who are individual small businesses start the day at 4 a.m. with a trip to the wholesale market, or 6 a.m. start at the wet market and spend their day pruning and misting vegetables as they sell. The result is that their vegetables and produce look fresher, and their reduced overhead, supermarket, incur high labor, rent, stocking fees translates along. Yes, I would agree with all that. And once again, they don't have any of that packaging. They don't put meats in packages, so they're throwing all that. All that money, all that money it goes into their pockets. Also. On a broader level, having wet markets available is good for the health of neighborhood children, particularly low-income families, according to a 2012 study based in China Health and Nutrition Safety data. The density of wet markets in China positively predicted children's nutritional intake. Basically, the study found when families have access to wet markets, children don't eat less manufactured supermarket food, which has higher amounts of added salt and sugar. The markets also provide one of a limited number of avenues for rural migrants to make a relatively high income and move up the social. Okay, I would agree with that in terms of nutrition, but then you have to say they're also at risk of germs. They're also at a greater risk of these kinds of viruses and fertilizers. If none of that is, like typically like fruits and vegetables and a lot of circumstances in China are fertilized with human feces and urine. Granted, there's a parallel to that in using like cow dungs and things like that, but it's not, they're not so involved in that processing of those fertilizers or getting those fertilizers to their, to be safe. It's just kind of winging it a lot of the ways. And you also have to take into account like animals. You can look at it from the aspect of the humane side. Well, the animals get to free roam. There's no sort of conglomerate meat factories or processing plants where the animals are all caged up and not moving or anything like that. Typically, the animals are just kind of roaming the hills and stuff like that, or have very wide open spaces to to sort of live. And you could say that's a much more humane, and along with that, farmers take more value in them because they are not a part of some sort of conglomerate system. It's their own sort of personal welfare. But these animals are roaming freely. Once again, they're exposed to other kinds of wildlife. Bats and things can just fly down and bite them. And they're also eating whatever is whatever they find, whatever they come across. So there's all kinds of garbage and things. You'll see goats and things kind of just going through, rummaging through piles of garbage and stuff. So there's this and this. The markets also provide unlimited avenues for rural mining, and a lot of people might make their income off of providing produce, vegetable, livestock. The issue, according to the numerous op-ed articles, is when wildlife is introduced into the system. Rightly, critics note that bringing stressed animals of different species who are all shedding different diseases into close proximity and without any supervision is, let's say, not good for hygiene. At worst, it may provide the breeding ground for COVID-19, SARS, and yes, certainly it will. But I would say this is a rarity. Like I said, in all of my time in China, and I've never seen bats. I've never seen exotic animals. I've seen people selling exotic animal parts on the street. Furs and things like that. I saw selling tiger paws once. I've seen that, but not in the wet markets, So my feeling is that whole sort of culture is one based in sort of secrecy. It's kind of like a hazing ritual, kind of bragging rights thing. Like, oh, I ate this, and you get that too. I mean, like you see foreigners coming here to eat things like scorpions and Certainly, I'm guilty of doing things like that myself. And you know, like there's certain exotic animals in the United States that are consumed as basically as bragging rights, as a you know, as an exotic sort of alternative, but probably not to, you know, not to the extent that it's not to this, I would say, to the extent, not to the extreme that you might find here. But then again, like, it's kind of like you got to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. Whereas I think and they don't want to get caught, you know, because for the most part it's illegal. Whereas in the United States, a lot of that, like, you know, I know that alligator and stuff like that, and venison meat and all that has to sort of, you have to get licensed and all kinds of things like that to sort of, to even sort of hunt these things. So as a taste for exotic meat, in my 15 years in China, I've been offered a camel hump at a major Chinese chain, muntjac at a secret wild game restaurant in Pudong, and a legal peacock in Yunnan. I've watched a bamboo rat butchered and cooked by a popular online chef, and seen a crocodile mouth tied shut and under bench at a downtown Shanghai seafood market. Snake is more than a delicacy. By one count, Shanghai has more than 800 shops serving water snakes, king snakes, and more. You know, I find that all credible, though my experiences don't really sort of tie into that. I really haven't been offered a lot of. I haven't been offered a lot of exotic animals, and like I said, it's more of a hazing ritual. You know, like if they think you're somebody that. Like, hey, if they kind of, it's a trust thing. Like, hey, we're gonna do this kind of secret thing that's a little bit crazy, but you'll walk out of it with bragging rights, you know. Yeah, the taste for the exotics is not the problem. Where I'm from in South Florida, people now patrol backyards in search of iguanas for the dinner table. Restaurants serve barbecue, alligator eggs, and spots to order overnight delivery of muskrat, bobcat, and rattlesnake on the internet. I would say that's probably accurate. I do about some of these things. Beyond meat that tastes good, at least to someone, an interest in exotic meats is rooted in homology beliefs extending back to the Yellow Emperor's inner classics, which codified the medicinal philosophy more than 2,000 years ago. The idea that eating exotics confers wealth and status on the buyer. Well, there you go, there you have it, bragging rights. And the belief that certain wild animal parts have therapeutic effects, pangolin meat relieving rheumatism, for example. Weak legal controls push the sale of even less exotic meats, such as venison and pheasant, into unregulated and unsupervised gray areas. Once again, it's a concern of regulations. According to the United Nations, gray areas in the wildlife trade, which mix legal and illegal species, as the Wuhan market at the probably start of the conflict did, more dangerous than black markets. So black markets, everyone knows it's illegal. Gray markets, law-abiding consumers can confuse availability for legal. There you go. Gray markets is an appropriate term. In Wuhan, it's important to note out that there was a bio lab nearby that studies coronavirus. So it makes sense that you would find one of these kind of rare wet markets that offer these kind of exotic species not far from that location. You know, providing them with stock. It's in a gray area that disease breeds, animal cruelty can thrive, and wild animals are smuggled. An open and frank discussion, free from the stigma of eating exotic meats, would go a long way toward the eventual necessity of a regulated system from farm to abattoir to bring these meats out of the gray market into the 21st century. I don't know if that's really what the intention is here, is to bring them out of the gray market and into the sort of, I don't know what you'd say, the green market. I think the idea is to keep them completely out of the food chain for the most part. Reform and streamlining of the control and management of wet markets, which often miss public and private ownership into chaotic effect, could help. There you go. Good suggestion. In the absence of unified management, hygiene and regulation can fall through the cracks, leading to illegal. There you go. You know, that's kind of part of the failure to organize this. But this is a wildlife regulation problem, not a wet market problem. problem. Not that long ago, chickens in wet markets were sold live, killed on the spot. Avian flu and the subsequent wholesale elimination of live chickens farm is proof that the country has the regulatory power and ability to execute urgent health policy when it needs to. I still see a lot of, my experience here, I would say as far back as 2000, I don't know about this policy, this is the first time I'm hearing it, but as far back, I would say back to 2000, as early as 2017, I was still seeing live birds in wet markets. And the bigger ones, the one I currently I currently patronize does not offer live fowl. Avian flu, of course, people will still buy them and slaughter them at their home. So, exotic meat does not need to be regulated out of existence as a bill passed in China's legislature on February 21st, but needs a more nuanced and comprehensive approach. A blanket ban will only push it underground. Education, regulation, a supervised farm network, and explicitly legal channels for consumers are all needed to counter the existing gray market. Yeah, I mean, there's something has to be looked more. Needs more regulation. That's why inspections and then regulations, and it's like China has that manpower. China's wet markets are more vital and in need now more than ever for its eaters, its children, in the fraying social fabric of a country grappling with the world's largest wave of urbanization. Yes, these things don't translate well into urban settings. If the trend of supermarkets in the West takes root in China, they will begin selling more processed foods than produce. This is what, all this sort of supermarkets are a way of kind of protecting the food chain. And this is kind of something what the United States learned. And the benefits of having that food distribution chain sort of start to become centralized and regulated is that you can also protect your populations by doing so. Your ability to attract, your ability to locate spread and things like that all becomes okay. And I think you saw that a lot. That's why there wasn't, I would say it's partly outside of the political sort of aspirations. I would say that's one of the reasons America was able to tackle the swine flu so effectively, is because they had a way of really controlling those food distribution chains. What markets sell ingredients? This is especially important as a second wave of modern supermarkets in America. Alibaba launched a successful chain of online-offline hybrid supermarkets under the Henan brand, which those are popping up in bigger cities. Right now, China's supermarket industry remains highly fragmented and regional. No major national brand dominating like those in the U.S. and the United Kingdom. But eventually there will be market consolidation, and with that a further streamlining of China's food supply, optimized for transportability, not flavor, a higher proportion of high salt and a diminished range of seasonal and delicate produce, and the further loss of food knowledge from where people find it. He's saying all this will be lost. I don't think it needs to be. He says a lot of these benefits don't necessarily need to be lost. There's probably a way to sort of modernize these wet markets. Like I said, you have the manpower to get people on the ground in these things, and supplies, like packaging and things like that, and refrigeration. Those things can all be sort of implemented, and China certainly has the ability to do that without putting too much burden on the vendors, which are really sort of not making high profits by any means, but they are giving an ability to to sustain themselves, an income, produce an income for themselves. I don't agree with this last article in sort of like saying that those things necessarily need to be lost or will definitely be lost. I think it needs to be addressed. There must be more sort of regulation, much more more controls, just basically on the food and health standards in those places. But I like wet markets too. They're very fascinating places, and like I said, there is a sense of community. I probably do most of my interaction with people. at the wet markets for the most part, and it's just kind of an interest. They're fascinating in terms of what they have to offer. And I guess that's about it. Yeah, wet markets. Is there anything else? Like I said, it's a bit odd that they. The only thing I can point to is that, yeah, like it makes sense that Wuhan would have a wet market that sells bats and exotic animals if there's a lab down the road, or just over on the other side of the hill that is studying diseases, and that's not an ideal sort of situation by any means. But for the most part, I've never seen bats and things like that in wet markets. So I see a lot of this media sort of giving the impression that they do, but they really don't. It's just kind of pork and stupid thing. Yeah, dang. All right, that's about all for today. We'll talk to you next time. Gonna ease on out of here. This is EXPAT News.